We do not hire people who sleep in trucks." The words landed louder than thunder inside the marble lobby of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Ethan Miller stood just inside the revolving doors, rain dripping from the shoulders of his worn work jacket, his boots leaving small dark marks on a floor polished bright enough to reflect chandeliers. He did not raise his voice. He did not clench his fists. He simply held a folded resume in one hand and kept the other tucked inside his pocket, where his daughter's inhaler rested beside 2 crumpled dollar bills. Outside, beyond the glass, his old blue pickup sat near the curb with the heater running low. 8-year-old Sophie was curled beneath a faded quilt in the passenger seat, drawing little houses in the fog on the window with her finger, pretending she was not cold, pretending she was not afraid. Brandon Cole, the hotel's operations manager, looked Ethan up and down as if the rain had carried him in with the street trash. His suit was perfect, his smile thin, his voice just loud enough for the front desk clerks to hear. "This is a 5-star property, Mr. Miller. We have guests arriving for a charity gala tonight. We cannot have a man like you wandering through the lobby asking for work." Ethan swallowed once. The lobby smelled of fresh lilies, espresso, and money. A bellman slowed near the luggage carts. 2 women by the elevators glanced over their coffee cups. Someone gave a quiet laugh, the kind people offer when cruelty is dressed in expensive shoes. Ethan looked toward the truck, saw Sophie lift her small hand to wave, and something in his chest pulled tight. He turned back to Brandon. "I am not asking to wander," he said, his voice low and steady. "I am asking to work. Maintenance. Loading dock. Boiler room. Trash pickup. Anything honest." Brandon gave a soft scoff. "Honest work requires references." Ethan held out the resume. The paper was bent at the corners, damp along one edge. "I have 20 years in construction safety and building repair." "And yet," Brandon said, looking past him to the truck, "you are standing here with nowhere to go." The lobby went quieter then. Not silent, not yet. Just quieter, like the building itself had taken a breath and was waiting to see what kind of man Ethan Miller would choose to be when stripped of comfort, pride, and witnesses who cared. He could have defended himself. He could have explained the foreclosure, the hospital bills, the job he lost after a report he never signed destroyed his name. He could have told them that grief was expensive in America and that a good man could fall a long way without ever becoming a bad one. But Ethan only lowered the resume slightly and said, "My daughter needs dinner tonight. I need a paycheck by Friday. That is all." Behind Brandon, near the grand staircase, a woman in a charcoal coat had stopped walking. Claire Whitmore, chief executive officer of Whitmore Hospitality, had entered unnoticed from the executive corridor, her pale hair pinned neatly, her eyes calm in the way winter skies are calm before snow. She had heard every word. She looked at Ethan's wet jacket, then at the little girl in the truck, then at the cracked yellow hard hat hanging from Ethan's duffel bag. Something about that hard hat made her face change. Brandon turned and stiffened. "Miss Whitmore, I was just handling a situation." Claire did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on Ethan. "What is your name?" she asked. Ethan stood a little straighter, not proud, just unwilling to disappear. "Ethan Miller, ma'am." Claire's breath caught so softly almost no one heard it. Then she looked toward the rain-soaked glass and said, "Mr. Miller, bring your daughter inside. No child waits in a cold truck while her father asks for honest work." Claire did not wait for Brandon to answer. She turned toward the nearest bellman and said, "Please bring the little girl inside and find her something warm to drink." The bellman moved quickly, almost grateful to have been given a kind order in a room that had grown too cold. Ethan opened his mouth as if to refuse, because pride was sometimes the last code a poor man owned, but Claire looked at him with a firmness that was not pity. "She is your daughter," she said. "Let her be warm." A minute later, Sophie stepped through the glass doors with the quilt wrapped around her shoulders and a purple backpack hanging from one arm. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her curls damp from the rain, and her eyes went straight to her father before they went anywhere else. "Daddy," she whispered. Ethan knelt in front of her, brushing rain from her sleeve with a hand rough from years of labor. "It is okay, sweetheart. We are just talking." But children who have slept in trucks learn to hear what adults try to hide. Sophie saw Brandon looking away. She saw the bent resume. She saw the way the front desk had gone quiet. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small plastic bag with 2 peanut butter crackers left inside. "You can have mine," she said. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. That was the kind of sentence that could break a father without anyone touching him. Claire saw it too. She saw the way his shoulders held steady, not because life was light, but because he had spent years learning how not to drop what mattered. Later, in a small waiting room behind the lobby, with a cup of hot chocolate warming Sophie's hands, Ethan sat across from Claire while Brandon stood near the door pretending not to listen. Claire placed his resume on the table. 20 years in construction safety, she said. Site supervisor. Code compliance. Structural repair. That is not a small background. Ethan nodded once. It used to be enough. What happened? Brandon gave a little laugh under his breath. Ethan looked at him, then back at Claire. He did not speak like a man begging to be believed. He spoke like a man tired of watching the truth arrive too late. 4 years ago, I was supervising a renovation on the west side of Denver. I flagged a scaffold system as unsafe. I wrote 3 warnings. The work continued anyway. When the job failed inspection, the company needed one name to bury under the paperwork. Mine was the cheapest. Sophie looked down into her cocoa. She knew this story only in pieces, the way children know storms from the sound of rain on the roof. Ethan continued, quieter now. After that, no contractor would touch me. My wife Hannah got sick the next winter. Insurance did not cover enough. We sold the house, then the tools, then the second car. I kept telling Sophie it was temporary. He looked through the small interior window toward the polished lobby glowing with gold light. Temporary can last a long time when nobody opens a door. Claire lowered her eyes to the cracked yellow hard hat beside his duffel bag. On the front, beneath scratches and old dust, the faded company logo looked painfully familiar. Whitmore Development. Her father's old construction division. Her fingers stilled on the resume. Where did you get that hard hat? She asked. Ethan touched the brim with something close to reverence. Same job. I kept it because it had my name on it from back when my name still meant something. For the first time, Claire did not look like a chief executive officer. She looked like a daughter remembering a locked room in her family history. Brandon shifted by the door. Miss Whitmore, I really do not think this is relevant. Claire did not turn around. I will decide what is relevant. The rain tapped softly against the windows. Sophie sipped her cocoa with both hands. Ethan sat still, unaware that the woman across from him had just recognized the first thread of a truth someone had tried very hard to bury. Claire stood slowly, gathering the resume with care instead of folding it carelessly, and that small act told Ethan more than her words did. I cannot undo a past I have not yet understood, she said. But I can offer you a chance to work today. Brandon's mouth tightened. Miss Whitmore, with respect, we have procedures. Claire looked at him then, calm as polished stone. Then we will follow them. Temporary maintenance support. 1 shift. Paid. Documented. Supervised. Ethan nodded, but he did not smile. Men who had been disappointed too many times learned to save their hope until it had somewhere safe to stand. He looked towards Sophie, who was sitting in the corner with her cocoa, swinging her feet above the carpet because the chair was too tall. Can she stay somewhere warm while I work? He asked. Claire answered before Brandon could. She can sit in the staff lounge. Maria from housekeeping has grandchildren. She will keep an eye on her. Sophie looked up. I can be quiet. Ethan crossed the room and crouched in front of her. You do not have to earn warmth, sweetheart. Her little face softened, and Claire looked away for a second, because grace sometimes arrives in a sentence so simple it exposes everything a room has failed to be. 10 minutes later, Ethan followed Claire and Brandon through a service hallway behind the lobby, away from the chandeliers, away from the lilies, away from the guests who would never know how many unseen hands kept luxury shining. The air changed as they descended 1 level. The scent of espresso became the smell of laundry steam, floor cleaner, warm metal, and old concrete. Pipes ran overhead in painted lines of red, blue, and yellow. Fluorescent lights hummed above them. A freight elevator groaned somewhere behind the wall. This was the part of the hotel where titles mattered less than competence. Claire stopped outside a storage room stacked with broken chairs, spare vents, paint cans, and boxes of old brass fixtures. This area needs to be cleared before tonight, she said. After that, maintenance asked for someone to inspect the east mechanical corridor and wipe down the oil residue near the boiler room. It is not pleasant work. Ethan looked at the room, then at the mop bucket, gloves, and tool cart waiting near the door. Work does not need to be pleasant to be honest. Brandon gave another small scoff. You understand this is not a management position. It is temporary labor. Ethan met his eyes, not sharply, not weakly, just directly. I understood that before I walked in. The answer took the pleasure out of Brandon's insult. Claire noticed. She also noticed the way Ethan rolled up his sleeves before touching anything, revealing strong forearms marked by old sun, pale scars from honest labor, and a small tattoo on the inside of his wrist. Not loud, not decorative, just a date and the name Hannah beneath it. Claire knew enough not to ask. Some names were not introductions. Some names were memorials. Ethan put on the gloves and began moving boxes with quiet efficiency, sorting what could be reused from what needed to be discarded, checking labels, clearing walkways, setting aside anything that looked unsafe. He did not rush to impress her. He did not slow down to seem wounded. He worked like a man returning to the only language life had never stolen from him. After several minutes, Claire stepped closer to the cracked yellow hard hat resting on his duffel bag. The faded Whitmore Development logo stared back at her like a ghost from a locked file cabinet. Beneath it, written in black marker, was Ethan Miller. Claire's throat tightened. You really worked the West Side renovation, she said quietly. Ethan lifted a box onto a shelf. I told you I did. And you warned them? He paused. The hum of the lights filled the space between them. 3 times. Brandon moved quickly. Miss Whitmore, we have a gala in less than 6 hours. This is not the time for old stories. Ethan picked up the mop, dipped it into the bucket, and looked down the dim corridor toward the pipes. Old stories are only old to the people who got to walk away from them. Claire did not answer, because in that moment, somewhere behind the walls of her family's beautiful hotel, a pipe gave a faint metallic knock, and Ethan Miller was the only one who looked up like he understood what it meant. The metallic knock came once, then faded into the walls as if the building had swallowed its own warning. Ethan kept his eyes on the overhead pipe. Claire watched him watching it. Brandon checked his phone. It is an old hotel, Brandon said. Old hotels make noise. Ethan did not argue. He only set the mop back in the bucket and wiped his hands on a towel. Old buildings talk before they fail, he said. Most people just call it noise. Brandon smiled without warmth. Your job is the storage room, not engineering. Claire turned toward Ethan. What did you hear? Before he could answer, a banquet coordinator rushed into the service corridor holding a clipboard against her chest. Claire, the donors are arriving early. The ballroom florist needs approval, and the Children's Foundation director is asking about the presentation. The polished world upstairs had begun pulling Claire back like a tide. Gold table linens were being steamed. Champagne glasses were being lined in perfect rows. A string quartet tested soft notes near the ballroom entrance. Every visible inch of the Whitmore Grand was preparing to look flawless for people who paid $5,000 a plate to talk about helping children with nowhere to sleep. 1 floor below them, Ethan Miller stood in borrowed work gloves, wondering whether his own child would have a bed that night. Claire hesitated, torn between the sound in the wall and the duties waiting above it. Brandon stepped in quickly. I will handle maintenance. You should greet the board. His voice was smooth now, polished for power. Claire looked at Ethan. Continue your assigned work. If you hear that sound again, tell me directly. Brandon's jaw tightened, but he said nothing until Claire was gone. The moment her heels disappeared down the corridor, his smile returned. Let us be very clear, he said. You do not speak to Claire unless spoken to. You do not walk through guest areas. You do not come near the ballroom. You use the service elevator, the rear hallway, and the rear entrance. Understand? Ethan looked at him for a long second. I understand doors. Brandon leaned closer, lowering his voice. Good. Then use the ones meant for people like you. The words hung there, small and ugly, but Ethan did not pick them up. He had learned long ago that not every insult deserved the dignity of an answer. He lifted the tool cart and rolled it down the service corridor, the wheels clicking over cracked concrete, one slow turn at a time. Upstairs, Sophie sat in the staff lounge beside Maria from housekeeping, both hands around a paper cup of warm apple cider. Maria had given her a clean hotel sweatshirt that hung past her wrists, and Sophie had thanked her 3 times, because children raised by struggling parents often learn gratitude before comfort. Through the half-open door, Sophie could see employees moving quickly with trays, linens, and flower boxes. 2 young staff members passed by, whispering. Is that the girl from the truck? One asked. Yes, the other said. Her dad is the one Claire picked up from the lobby. They laughed softly, not loud enough to be cruel in public, but loud enough for a child to understand she was the joke. Sophie looked down at her cider. Maria saw her face and reached across the table. Do not listen to careless people, honey. Sophie tried to smile. My daddy says people can be wrong about you and still sound sure. Maria's eyes softened. A few minutes later, Ethan came to check on her, still wearing the work gloves, his jacket now drying in patches across his shoulders. Sophie stood and hurried to him, but stopped herself before running, as if even joy needed permission in a place this expensive. Did you get the job? She asked. Ethan knelt and fixed the oversized sleeves of her sweatshirt. For today. Is today enough? He brushed a curl away from her cheek. Today is where tomorrow starts. Her lower lip trembled, and she whispered, They think we are dirty. Ethan looked past her toward the hallway where the staff had gone quiet. Then he took a napkin, dampened it with water, and gently wiped a small streak of mud from her shoe. Listen to me, sophomore. People can look at us the wrong way. They can talk wrong about us. But we do not have to live wrong because of them. The lights flickered once, then twice. Somewhere below, behind the walls of the beautiful hotel, the same metallic knock returned, louder this time, followed by a low shudder through the floor. The shudder passed beneath the floor like a warning spoken through concrete. Ethan rose slowly, one hand still resting on Sophie's shoulder. Around them, the staff lounge went quiet. A stack of paper cups trembled beside the coffee machine. Somewhere in the corridor, a cart rattled against the wall, then stopped. Maria crossed herself softly and looked toward the ceiling. That did not sound like an old hotel, she whispered. Ethan was already moving. Stay with Maria, he told Sophie. Her eyes widened. Daddy. He turned back just long enough to make his voice gentle. I am only going to listen. Downstairs, the service hallway had changed. The warm metal smell was stronger now, mixed with something damp and sharp, like heated water touching dust. The fluorescent lights flickered again, buzzing overhead. Ethan followed the sound past laundry carts, past stacked crates of gala programs, past a locked supply cage, and into the east mechanical corridor. Two maintenance workers were standing near the boiler room door, arguing over a tablet. One of them kept tapping the screen as if numbers would become answers if he touched them hard enough. Brandon stood beside them, pale with irritation more than fear. Reset the panel, he snapped. We cannot have a system outage during the gala. One worker shook his head. Pressure is climbing in the east line. The sensor keeps jumping. Then the sensor is bad. Ethan stepped closer. It is not the sensor. Brandon turned sharply. Nobody asked you. Ethan looked past him to the painted pipe running along the ceiling, then to the hairline vibration in the pressure gauge. His face did not change, but something in his eyes settled into place. Not panic. Recognition. Shut down the east circulation pump and open the bypass valve on the return line. The workers stared at him. Brandon laughed once. Absolutely not. Ethan pointed to the pipe. That knock is not expansion. It is trapped pressure hitting a restricted elbow. If you keep forcing heat through it, the ballroom loses climate control, the kitchen loses hot water, and your fire suppression pressure may drop below code. You do not need panic. You need 3 minutes of humility. One of the maintenance workers looked at the gauge, then back at Ethan. He is right about the return line. Brandon stepped between them. Do not touch anything unless I authorize it. At that moment, Claire appeared at the end of the corridor, her gala coat gone, her expression focused. What is happening? Brandon immediately straightened. A minor maintenance fluctuation. I have it handled. Ethan did not speak over him. He simply stepped aside so Claire could see the gauge for herself. The needle jumped again, small but steady. Claire looked at her maintenance team. Is it minor? Neither man answered quickly enough. Claire turned to Ethan. Tell me. Ethan took one breath. You have a blockage or an old repair inside the east wall. The system is compensating, but it is compensating in the wrong direction. You can keep the gala pretty for another hour, or you can keep the building safe tonight. Not both. The words landed cleanly. No drama. No shouting. Just truth, standing there in work gloves. Claire looked at Brandon. Shut down the pump. Claire, the board is upstairs. Then let the board wait in a safe building. The maintenance worker opened the panel. The pump wound down with a low mechanical sigh. Ethan moved with permission now, not arrogance, taking a wrench, checking the bypass, guiding the worker through each step without making anyone feel small. That was the strange thing about real competence. It did not need to humiliate the room to lead it. Within minutes, the gauge eased downward. The knocking softened. The lights steadied. A breath seemed to leave the walls. Claire watched Ethan wipe condensation from the pipe with a rag, then tapped the old plaster beside it. "There is an access panel behind this wall," he said. Brandon folded his arms. "There is no panel there." Ethan looked at the seam beneath layers of paint. "There was." Claire nodded to the worker. "Open it." The plaster cover came loose after a careful cut, revealing a rusted metal panel hidden behind paint and trim. Inside, wrapped around the old valve assembly, was a faded maintenance tag and a cracked seal marked with the name of the same West Side renovation company that had destroyed Ethan's life. The corridor fell silent. Ethan stared at the tag as if the past had reached through the wall and placed itself in his hands. Claire stepped closer, her face losing color. "That company should never have touched this hotel." Brandon's voice came too fast. "Old records get mixed all the time." Ethan lifted the tag gently, reading the date printed beneath the grime. It was 4 years old. The same month. The same project cycle. The same buried mistake. He looked at Claire, not accusing her, not pleading with her, only standing in the quiet dignity of a man who had just found proof that his fall had never been an accident. "I told them 3 times," he said. This time, no one laughed. Claire did not touch the tag at first. She only stared at it, as if a small piece of stained paper had become heavier than the chandeliers upstairs. The east mechanical corridor was quiet now except for the cooling tick of pipes and the low breath of the ventilation system returning to balance. Ethan stood beneath the fluorescent lights with the cracked hard hat under one arm, his work gloves darkened with dust, his face still. Brandon was the first to speak. "This proves nothing. Old contractors, old tags, old confusion. We have a gala full of donors upstairs, Claire." Claire finally looked at him. "Do not call me Claire in front of staff when you are asking me to ignore a safety concern." The maintenance workers lowered their eyes. Brandon's face tightened, but he stepped back. Claire turned to Ethan. "Come with me." He hesitated. "My daughter. Maria will bring her to my office." That sentence should have sounded impossible to a man who had been turned away from warmer places than this. But Claire said it like a decision, not a favor. They walked through the service elevator and up to the executive floor, where the carpet swallowed the sound of their steps, and framed photographs of old Whitmore properties lined the hallway. Ethan noticed one picture near the corner. Charles Whitmore, Claire's father, standing in a hard hat beside a construction crew. The date beneath the frame matched the year Ethan's life had begun to fall apart. Claire opened a glass office door and went straight to a locked file cabinet behind her desk. Her hands were steady, but her breathing had changed. She pulled a brass key from a drawer, opened the cabinet, and removed a gray archive box marked Development Division, Closed Projects. "My father shut down Whitmore Development before he died," she said. "He said there was rot in the paperwork. I thought he meant financial waste." Ethan stood by the door, careful not to step too far into a room that did not feel meant for men with wet boots. Sometimes rot starts with one signature. Claire lifted folder after folder, scanning tabs until she stopped. West Platte Renovation. Her fingers paused over the name. Then she opened it. Inside were inspection reports, subcontractor invoices, internal memorandums, and one sealed envelope yellowed at the edges. Across the front, written in her father's handwriting, were 3 words: "Find Ethan Miller." The room seemed to lose its air. Ethan looked at the envelope but did not reach for it. Men who had been blamed by documents learned not to trust paper too quickly. Claire opened it carefully and unfolded a letter that had never been mailed. Her voice softened as she read. "Mr. Miller, I do not know if this letter will reach you, but I believe you were made to carry responsibility for warnings you tried to give. I have reviewed the missing safety notices. Your name appears not as the cause, but as the man who tried to stop the failure." Ethan's jaw moved once, but no sound came out. Claire continued, each word slower than the last. "I owe you the truth, and if my company helped bury it, then my family owes you more than an apology." Outside the office windows, Denver glowed beneath a gray evening sky. Inside, the only sound was Sophie's small voice in the hallway asking Maria whether her daddy was in trouble. Ethan closed his eyes, not because he was weak, Because after 4 years of carrying a lie on his back, the truth had finally spoken his name in another man's handwriting. Claire lowered the letter. Her eyes were wet, but her voice held. My father was looking for you before he died. Ethan looked at the old Whitmore photograph on the wall, then at the letter in her hand. Why did he not find me? Claire turned one page deeper into the file, and there it was. A forwarding request stamped rejected, a settlement notice marked undeliverable, and a handwritten note from Brandon Cole stating that Ethan Miller had admitted fault and disappeared. Claire's face changed completely. Not with shock anymore. With understanding. Because someone made sure he did not. Claire closed the file, but the truth did not close with it. It sat between her and Ethan like a living thing, quiet, wounded, waiting for courage. Before she could speak, music drifted up from the ballroom below, soft strings and polite applause, the sound of wealthy people gathering beneath chandeliers to praise compassion from a safe distance. Sophie entered the office with Maria, still wearing the oversized hotel sweatshirt, her small hand tucked into Maria's palm. The moment she saw Ethan, she ran to him and pressed her face against his side. Are we in trouble? She asked. Ethan rested a hand on her hair. No, sweetheart. He looked at Claire, then at the letter on the desk. I think the truth just found us. Claire's expression hardened with purpose. I'm going downstairs. Brandon will be placed on administrative leave tonight. The legal team will receive this file before midnight. Ethan shook his head gently. Do not do this in anger. Claire looked surprised. After what was done to you? Especially after what was done to me, he said. Anger makes people careless. Truth does not need to shout. For one breath, Claire understood why her father had written his name in that envelope. Ethan Miller was not just a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had refused to become cruel after losing it. But downstairs, Brandon Cole was already moving faster than the truth. In the ballroom, beneath golden lights and white floral arches, he stood near the presentation table with a microphone in hand. Behind him, a large screen displayed the gala logo for the Children's Housing Foundation. Donors sat at round tables with folded napkins, silver chargers, and glasses of sparkling water. They expected a speech about generosity. Brandon gave them a spectacle instead. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, smiling with practiced concern. Before the evening continues, I must address a serious matter involving hotel safety. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Claire stepped into the back of the ballroom with Ethan and Sophie just as the screen changed. An old scanned report appeared, grainy and official-looking, with Ethan Miller's name circled in red. The air left Sophie's little body in a quiet gasp. Ethan stopped walking. Brandon's voice grew heavier. Earlier today, a temporary worker was brought into this hotel without proper review. Some of you may have seen him. What you may not know is that this man was connected to a failed construction project 4 years ago, a project with serious safety consequences. Whispers moved through the room like cold wind under a door. A woman covered her mouth. A board member leaned toward another. Someone looked at Ethan's boots, then at Sophie's sweatshirt, as if poverty itself had become evidence. Claire started forward, but Ethan gently lifted one hand, not to stop her forever, only to steady the moment. Brandon pointed toward him. That is the man, Ethan Miller. And I believe our guests deserve to know why he was found near a restricted mechanical area on the night of our largest charity event. Sophie's eyes filled. Daddy, why is he saying that? Ethan knelt beside her in the aisle, surrounded by people who did not know him but had already been invited to judge him. His voice was soft enough for only her and the nearest tables to hear. Because some people are afraid of the truth, sophomore. So they dress fear up as certainty. Then he stood, removed the cracked yellow hard hat from his duffel bag, and carried it to the nearest empty table. He placed it down carefully, like a witness. The room watched. Ethan did not reach for the microphone. He did not defend himself with anger. He looked at the guests, at Brandon, at Claire, and finally at his daughter. I came here today for work, he said. Not pity, not revenge. Work. I have been poor. I have been tired. I have slept in a truck so my daughter could stay warm under the last blanket we owned. But I did not come here to confess to a lie that was handed to me by men who had cleaner shoes and dirtier hands. The ballroom fell still. Even Brandon's smile weakened. Claire stepped onto the stage with her father's unopened truth in her hand, and for the first time that night, the most powerful people in the room stopped speaking. Claire stood on the stage with the letter held carefully in both hands, and the ballroom seemed to shrink around that single piece of paper. Brandon reached for the microphone again, but Claire turned her head just enough to stop him without raising her voice. "You have spoken enough." The words were calm, but they carried through the room with the weight of a closing door. Brandon froze. Claire faced the guests, the board members, the hotel staff gathered near the walls, and finally Ethan, who stood beside the empty table where his cracked yellow hard hat rested under the chandelier light. Sophie clung to his hand, her eyes shining with fear and hope she was too young to name. Claire lifted the letter. 4 years ago, a renovation project connected to my family business failed because safety warnings were ignored. Tonight, evidence from our own archive shows that Ethan Miller did not hide those warnings. He wrote them. He filed them. He tried to protect people who later let him take the blame. A low murmur moved across the ballroom, then faded as quickly as it came. Claire continued, her voice softer now, but no less steady. My father discovered this before he passed away. He wrote a letter to Ethan Miller, but that letter was never delivered. Internal records show that his location was marked unreachable based on information provided by Brandon Cole. Every face turned toward Brandon. The color drained from his expression. That is not the full context, he said quickly. There were business pressures. There were legal concerns. Claire looked at him with quiet sadness. There are always polished words for cowardice. The room went silent. Not polite silent. Not confused silent. The kind of silence that arrives when people recognize that someone poor was never beneath them, only buried beneath what they chose not to see. Claire stepped down from the stage and walked toward Ethan, not as an owner, not as a woman with power, but as someone carrying a debt that money alone could never pay. She stopped in front of him and held out the letter. Mr. Miller, you came here today asking for a job. You asked for the lowest position we had, not because that was all you were worth, but because life had convinced you that asking for more would only give people another chance to say no. Ethan's throat tightened. He did not take the letter yet. Claire's eyes filled, but she did not look away. My answer is this. Yes, you have work here, if you still want it. I am formally offering you the position of Director of Building Safety for Whitmore Hospitality, pending the standard human resources process, with full benefits, temporary housing for you and Sophie beginning tonight, an independent legal review of every document connected to the case that destroyed your reputation. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan stared at Claire as if he had forgotten how to breathe. Claire placed the letter gently against the hard hat on the table. And before any job title, before any paycheck, before any paperwork, I owe you what should have been said years ago. My family company failed you. This hotel failed you when you walked in wet and cold. I failed you for not knowing sooner. I am sorry. Ethan lowered his head. For years, he had survived foreclosure notices, empty refrigerators, hospital bills, job rejections, and nights pretending the truck was an adventure so his daughter would not be afraid. But he had not survived them because he was unbreakable. He had survived because Sophie needed him to keep standing. Now, with an entire ballroom watching, the strength finally slipped from his face. Tears ran down his cheeks, quiet and unashamed. Sophie wrapped both arms around his waist. Daddy, she whispered, does this mean we do not have to sleep in the truck tonight? Ethan tried to answer, but no words came. Claire knelt slightly, so she was level with Sophie. No, sweetheart. Tonight you get a real bed, a warm room, and breakfast in the morning. Sophie looked up at her father, and Ethan covered his mouth with one trembling hand. The guests who had whispered before now looked down at their plates. The staff members who had laughed in the hallway wiped their eyes. Brandon stood alone near the stage, surrounded by all the silence he had tried to place on another man. And in that silence, Ethan Miller was not restored by money, or pity, or applause. He was restored by truth. Brandon was escorted from the ballroom by hotel security without a raised voice, without a scene, and without the satisfaction of pretending he had been misunderstood. Claire did not celebrate his fall. Ethan did not watch him leave. There are moments when justice does not need an audience, only the courage to stop protecting a lie. That night, after the donors had gone quiet and the music had faded into a soft memory, Claire personally walked Ethan and Sophie upstairs to a clean suite on the 8th floor. It was not the grandest room in the hotel, but to Sophie it looked like a palace. She stood in the doorway, staring at the 2 beds, the folded towels, the little basket of apples on the desk, and the window looking out over the Denver lights. "Daddy," she whispered, "is this really for us?" Ethan looked at the room, then at the daughter who had learned to ask permission before feeling safe. His voice broke gently. "Yes, sweetheart. Just for tonight." Claire stood near the door, careful not to step too far into their moment. "For as long as the employee housing paperwork takes," she said. "And tomorrow morning, Human Resources will meet with you after breakfast. No pressure tonight. No signatures while you are tired." Ethan turned to her, and for the first time that day, he did not look like a man bracing for the next blow. He looked exhausted, grateful, and almost afraid to trust Mercy. "Why are you doing all this?" Claire held her father's letter against her coat. "Because my father believed the truth mattered. Because you protected this building when no one here had earned your loyalty. And because your daughter should never have had to wonder whether kindness had a front door." Ethan nodded, but words failed him again. Sophie walked to Claire and held out one of the 2 peanut butter crackers from the small plastic bag she had saved all day. "You can have this," she said. Claire accepted it like it was something priceless. "Thank you, Sophie." 3 months later, the Whitmore Grand felt different in ways guests could not always name. The East mechanical system had been fully repaired. Every property under Whitmore Hospitality began a new safety review led by Ethan Miller, whose name was cleared after the independent investigation uncovered the buried warnings, the false notes, and the pattern of silence that had cost him 4 years of dignity. Brandon lost his position, and the legal process moved forward quietly, without spectacle. Ethan did not become rich overnight. That was not the miracle. The miracle was smaller and stronger. A real apartment with a kitchen where Sophie taped drawings to the refrigerator. A school where she no longer worried about giving an address. A paycheck that arrived on time. A hard hat cleaned and placed on Ethan's new office shelf, not as a reminder of shame, but as proof that truth can outlive the people who try to bury it. Claire visited the safety office often at first for updates, then sometimes with coffee, then sometimes with no reason urgent enough to explain the warmth in her smile. She never rushed Ethan's heart. He never mistook gratitude for love. They simply learned each other slowly, through honest work, quiet lunches, shared concern for Sophie, and the kind of respect that does not demand a name before it becomes real. One Saturday morning in spring, Claire joined Ethan and Sophie at a small diner 2 blocks from the hotel. Sophie laughed over pancakes. Claire listened as if every word mattered, and Ethan watched the sunlight touch the table between them. He thought of the truck, the rain, the lobby, the words that had tried to reduce him to nothing. Then he looked at the woman who had chosen truth over reputation, and the little girl who finally slept without fear. He did not need the room to applaud. He did not need the world to kneel. He only reached for Sophie's hand, then let his other hand rest gently near Claire's on the table, close enough to promise, patient enough to heal. Some beginnings do not arrive with fireworks. Some arrive with breakfast, forgiveness, and a quiet door left open.